The galactic horizon was ablaze with fire. Massive ships, larger than entire cities, burned in the atmosphere of distant planets. Their crews, once proud, once unified, had been reduced to scattered remnants, retreating into the void. The Zarn Dominion, an insectoid empire born of ruthless efficiency, had overrun the Galactic Confederation's forces with a cold, mechanical precision. Each new battle brought them closer to victory, and no one believed the Confederation could hold out much longer. Commanding the last line of defense, Admiral Tver stood on the bridge of the Confederation flagship Excalus, staring at the tactical map flickering in front of her. She had been a diplomat before this, someone who had brokered peace and negotiated treaties between warring species. But now, there was only one mission: survival. Her species, the aquatic Tron, had never been designed for warfare. They were thinkers, negotiators, and dreamers, not soldiers. The Tron had hoped that their alliances with more militaristic species, like the Karen or the Votans, would be enough to turn the tide against the Zarn. But in the face of overwhelming numbers, those alliances had crumbled like dry paper, their fleets shattered, their worlds obliterated. The Zarn were relentless. Their hive mind network made them nearly impossible to predict, and their soldiers, bred solely for war, were unstoppable. "We're out of time, Admiral," said Commander Sorna, a Votan war hero whose species had a natural affinity for combat, but was now growing weary. He stood beside Tver, his usually vibrant red skin dulled by the stress of endless conflict. "We can't hold out for much longer." "I know," Tver whispered, her voice betraying the exhaustion that weighed on her. She had long since stopped believing in victory. Now, it was just about finding a way to survive long enough to warn the next generation. "Do we have any other options?" Sorna looked at the data streams running through the holoprojector. It was a grim sight. The Confederation's planets were falling one by one, like dominoes in a chain that never seemed to end. The Zarn didn't just conquer, they annihilated. Whole populations were wiped out, and any survivors were either enslaved or consumed to further fuel their hive. The last remnants of the Confederation fleet were scattered across the galaxy, hiding in pockets of space too small to make a difference. "Maybe," he said, eyes narrowing with a glimmer of reluctant hope. "There's one last option." Tver turned her head sharply toward him, eyes wide with suspicion. "What do you mean?" Sorna hesitated. It's not something we would ever do under normal circumstances. It's a desperation move." "I'm listening." "We send a distress signal to Earth," Sorna said quietly. "The humans—" Tver frowned. "Earth?" "The humans are a primitive species. They have no advanced weaponry, no galactic fleets. Why would they?" "Exactly," Sorna interrupted. "They have no stake in the war, no reason to be involved. But that's what makes them dangerous. The Zarn, they don't see humans as a threat. They think humans are insignificant, weak, and we can use that. Maybe." Sorna's tone was filled with a kind of reluctant hope. "The humans, they're unpredictable. They're not like anyone else in the Confederation. We've seen it before in small skirmishes. They fight dirty, and they're ruthless. They might be able to make a difference." Tver studied him, weighing the options. The idea of calling upon a species as primitive as Earth felt absurd. Yet, in the face of certain annihilation, was it any more absurd than begging for mercy from their alien captors? She turned toward her communications officer. "Send the distress signal," she ordered, her voice cold and determined. "Do it." Earth wasn't supposed to matter in the grand scheme of things. It was a barely developed planet in a backwater sector, hidden behind a veil of galactic indifference. The Tron had mapped the system only once, when they had first encountered the humans. A species full of potential, but not yet advanced enough to be of any concern. Yet, they were desperate. The Confederation was on the verge of collapse, and there was no one left to call for help. The distress signal wasn't even a plea for aid. It was a call for survival, a desperate request to a species that had never known true intergalactic war. It was a gamble. No one expected a reply. It was nothing more than a faint whisper lost in the vast expanse of space. But what the Confederation didn't know was that humans had been preparing. Their own governments, isolated from the galactic conflict, had watched the war unfold from the shadows. They had seen the rise of the Zarn Dominion, the systematic destruction of entire civilizations. They had heard the stories of the Confederation's plight, but they hadn't acted. Not yet. Until now. Admiral Tveres' heart skipped a beat when the first response came through the comms channel. It was a simple message. We're on our way. No further explanation, no questions. Just that. They had come. Against all odds, humanity had responded. The fleet appeared in the star system 3 days later. Their ships were nothing like anything the Confederation had ever seen. Small, but fast and heavily armed, with sleek hulls that almost seemed to shimmer in the darkness of space. It wasn't their size that made them formidable. It was their sheer brutality. The human fleet arrived without fanfare. No grand speeches, no introductions. Just an immediate strike on the Zarn outposts. There was no mercy, no negotiation. The humans didn't care about honor or territory. They only cared about one thing: winning. And in that moment, Admiral Tver realized something she hadn't considered. The war wasn't lost. Not yet. Not as long as the humans had arrived. The first human strike was swift, brutal, and without mercy. The Zarn had been confident, overconfident. They had underestimated the humans, assuming that their primitive ships and seemingly illogical tactics would never pose a threat. They were wrong. Admiral Tver watched the unfolding battle from the Excalus bridge, her heart pounding as the human fleet ripped through the Zarn defenses like a predator through prey. The humans didn't hesitate. They didn't negotiate. They struck fast and without warning, their ships firing on all cylinders, obliterating entire Zarn outposts with pinpoint precision. The human flagship, a vessel known as the Vigilance, was a sight to behold. It was not large, not imposing by galactic standards, but its design was unlike anything Tver had ever seen. It moved with the grace of a predator, sly, silent, and efficient. The ship's sleek black surface reflected the dying light of the Zarn's burning space stations, almost as if mocking their defeat. Captain Elena Rhodes stood on the Vigilance's command deck, her eyes locked onto the tactical map. Her hands were steady, despite the chaos of battle surrounding her. She had seen worse. She had fought in wars that no one remembered, against enemies who didn't play by the rules. She knew what it took to win, and she had no intention of losing. "Target the nearest Zarn cruiser," she commanded, her voice calm, almost detached. "Destroy it?" Without question, her crew went to work. The ship's weapons hummed to life, and within seconds, a wave of missiles shot toward the Zarn cruiser. The explosion was spectacular, too quick to be anything but total annihilation. Tver had watched many battles in her time, but this was different. The humans weren't playing by any established rules of war. They weren't aiming for clean victories. They weren't trying to capture or negotiate. They were simply destroying everything in their path. They weren't out to win a battle. They were out to win the war. "This is madness," murmured Sorna, watching from the Excalus bridge. "The Zarn are breaking their lines, but at what cost? The humans, they're slaughtering them. This is not war. It's execution." Tveres' brow furrowed, but she said nothing. She knew what Sorna meant. The humans were fighting not to defend, but to eliminate. Every strike, every move was a message. We will do anything, sacrifice anything, to win. The Zarn were used to war being a matter of strategy and numbers, but the humans fought with a kind of ferocity that bordered on insanity. They didn't just want to defeat the enemy, they wanted to break them. Across the battlefield, the Zarn commanders were in disarray. For the first time in this war, they were on the defensive. Their hive mind structure, so effective in organizing massive forces, was beginning to fracture under the unpredictability of human tactics. Zarn ships, typically coordinated in perfect formations, were now scattered and disoriented. Human fighters, smaller and faster, weaved through their lines, launching surprise attacks, striking without warning, and vanishing before the Zarn could even react. "Commander," a voice broke into Tveres' thoughts. It was Lieutenant Kralin, her communications officer. "The humans are sending a message. They say it's for the Zarn. Put it through," Tver ordered, her voice tight with a growing sense of unease. The screen flickered to life, and Captain Rhodes' face appeared, her expression cold and unreadable. To the Zarn Dominion, she said, her voice a perfect blend of calm and chilling authority. You've lost. Surrender, or we'll continue to do what we do best. Destroy. Your choice. Tver's mouth went dry. The Zarn had never encountered a species that didn't beg for mercy in the face of annihilation. They had never seen a race that fought not to defend their people, but to break their enemy's spirit, to destroy their will to resist. That's madness, muttered Sorna, staring at the screen. They're not even offering a chance for peace, for negotiation. They're just demanding surrender. And they'll get it, Tver said, her voice distant. It wasn't a prediction. It was a realization. She had been through enough battles to understand one thing. If the humans kept fighting like this, they wouldn't need to negotiate. The Zarn would break. No one had the will to keep fighting against such relentless brutality. The next hour was a blur of explosions, gunfire, and firestorms. The humans had begun to move their forces onto the Zarn's primary colony world, a lush, forested planet that had once been teeming with life. Now it was being turned into a battlefield. Humans didn't hesitate to land their troops, to fight their way through the Zarn's defenseless cities. They're landing on the surface, Sorna said, disbelief in his voice. What are they thinking? Tver didn't have an answer. She didn't know. The humans weren't trying to occupy. They weren't trying to liberate. They were attacking simply because they could. They were attacking because they had nothing left to lose. And in that moment, she understood. The Zarn had underestimated humanity's will to fight. This wasn't a species looking to save itself. It was a species willing to destroy everything in its path, to leave nothing but ashes in their wake. As the Zarn forces began to retreat, their morale shattered. Captain Rhodes stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, watching the destruction unfold. A small, calculating smile tugged at the corners of her lips. This wasn't just a victory, it was a statement. The humans had arrived, and they would never leave until they had done what they came to do. We've won the first battle, Rhodes said, her voice as sharp as a blade. But this war is far from over. Tver, watching from the Excalus bridge, finally allowed herself to believe it. The humans had turned the tide. The war was no longer lost. It had only just begun. The battle was over, but the war had left a wound in the galaxy that would never fully heal. The Zarn had been forced into retreat, their hive shattered, their morale crushed under the weight of humanity's ferocity. The Confederation had won, for now. But at what cost? The victory was hollow. Entire systems had been turned to ash, planets rendered uninhabitable by the relentless assault of the humans. There was no celebration, no fanfare. The Confederation stood in a stunned silence, watching as the human fleet moved toward its next objective, their own sovereignty. Admiral Tver stood on the bridge of the Excalus, her hands clasped behind her back as she gazed out at the debris field left by the final human strike. The once thriving Zarn colony had been reduced to a smoldering ruin, the atmosphere still heavy with the lingering fumes of destruction. She could feel the weight of the decision she had made, the decision to call for human aid. It had turned the tide of the war, but it had also brought something far darker. Admiral, Sorna's voice interrupted her thoughts. The humans are not staying, are they? Tver turned to face him, her expression unreadable. No, they've made it clear they don't want to be part of the Confederation. They'll leave, but they'll remember this war. And they'll remember who they fought for. Not for long, though, Sorna muttered, casting a glance at the tactical map. The Confederation leaders are already speaking of rebuilding, of reintegrating the Zarn systems. They'll forget the cost of this victory, and they'll forget who turned the tide. The humans won't be needed anymore. Tver's gaze hardened. She had watched the Confederation's response to the victory, seen the way they had already begun to turn their focus back to diplomacy, back to their idealistic dream of galactic peace. They wanted to rebuild, to return to the days before the war, as if the past few years hadn't happened, as if humanity hadn't reshaped the fate of the galaxy in a few short weeks. The Confederation would soon forget the human intervention, glossing over the harsh reality of the methods that had won the war. But Tver could not forget. She had seen the humans in action, their unyielding ruthlessness, their willingness to destroy entire worlds to ensure their victory. There was no question that the Confederation had won the war, but it was clear that the galaxy had changed in ways that could never be undone. The humans had taken the first step toward their own empire, one built not on diplomacy, but on power. The human fleet was already preparing to leave the system, its ships moving toward the outer edges of Confederation space. Tver knew it was only a matter of time before the humans would be forced to choose: stay and integrate with the Confederation, or claim their independence and stake a claim to their own future. She suspected the latter would come soon enough. The humans had shown that they were not afraid to fight for what they wanted, and they wanted more than just a place at the table. Captain Elena Rhodes stood on the bridge of the Vigilance, her face expressionless as she watched the human fleet make its departure. The war was over, but it had only been the beginning for humanity. She had seen the galaxy's reaction to their tactics, their willingness to destroy. The Confederation leaders, the alien races that had relied on diplomacy and peaceful coexistence for millennia, were already shifting uncomfortably in the wake of the human intervention. They were uncomfortable with the ruthlessness of it, but Rhodes knew they would accept it. They had no choice. In the face of such raw, unbridled power, they would either adapt or fall. "You did good, Captain," Lieutenant Grant said quietly from behind her. "We've earned their respect, but they won't forget the cost." "I don't expect them to," Rhodes replied, her voice flat. "I never cared about their respect." "And what now?" Rhodes turned toward him, her eyes narrowing. "Now, we take what we've earned." She knew that the Confederation would never fully trust humanity. Their methods had been too extreme, too alien to their way of thinking. But the humans had done what no one else could do. They had won. The galaxy would never be the same, and the humans had positioned themselves to reap the benefits. Rhodes had seen the seeds of a new empire growing in the ashes of the war. The Confederation might not accept them, but the humans didn't need their acceptance. They had power, and power was all that mattered. Back aboard the Excalibur, Tver stood at the observation window, watching the last remnants of the human fleet disappear into the distance. She had heard their message loud and clear. The humans had not come to be allies. They had come to reshape the galaxy to their liking. Their victory over the Zarn had been a statement, not just to the Dominion, but to every race in the galaxy. Humanity would never again be a footnote in galactic history. They had proven their strength, their will to win, no matter the cost. "What happens now?" Sorna asked, his voice soft with uncertainty. "Do we rebuild?" Tver didn't respond immediately. She was lost in thought, considering the future of the Confederation. There would be no going back, no restoring the peace that had once existed. The humans had shown everyone the true price of victory, and in the process, they had irrevocably altered the course of the galaxy. The Confederation would try to rebuild, but the truth was simple. Humanity had proven that power, not peace, was what governed the stars now. "We rebuild," Tver said finally, her voice heavy with the weight of what she was about to say. "But we do so knowing that the next war will be fought on different terms. The humans have shown us that, and when the next conflict comes, they'll be on the other side." Sorna's eyes widened. "You think they'll turn on us?" Tver didn't answer. She didn't need to. They both knew the truth now. Humanity wasn't a species that would play by anyone's rules. They had come to win, and when they decided the Confederation was no longer necessary, the galaxy would be theirs to command. The humans had unleashed a new era, one that promised not peace, but conquest. And that was a price Tver wasn't sure the galaxy could afford. With a final glance at the empty space where the human fleet had once stood, Tver turned away. The war was over, but the real battle, one of power, dominance, and survival, was just beginning.